As I record this, Charlie Kirk's remembrance service was yesterday. And I don't think I'm going to get this up today, just taking a look at the time here and going through and recording this and what it's going to take to do some light editing. But it was really quite the sight to see. And for such a horrific evil that we had seen, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, think about the results of that. Now, of course, it's not 100% of the people, but think about this. We have seen coast to coast candlelight vigils, especially on college campuses. That was once the wholehearted domain of the left. But because of Charlie Kirk, it wasn't, and we saw, or at least not anymore, and we saw the results of that. Vigils across the country, vigils in communities that don't have college campuses. And we've even seen vigils happen internationally. You would think that Charlie Kirk was some world leader or famous movie star for such a thing to happen, and yet not even they get such a response for their passings. Now, maybe you could talk about it as, well, so many of them, pass of natural causes, and you take a look at things like Kennedy or Elvis Presley that may have drawn in large crowds because it was so sudden and unexpected and people wanted to pay their respect, versus someone that lived into their 90s and just passed away of old age. Okay, I get that. But there is so many things that have come out there that have brought people together, reignited faith, that has really amplified the message of Charlie Kirk. But what is that message? Well, as I was going through and watching the remembrance service, there was one speech that really stuck out. And, you're not going to be surprised. It's probably the most obvious speech of them all. And I watched all the speeches, and I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback it. And I realize people have different styles of speaking, and no matter how you go about this with the time limit that they have, there's no way to fully express in complete details how you truly feel and what it is you want to get out in such a perfect way. But there was one particular statement of a speech that I think really encapsulated why Charlie Kirk was on the mission that he was on. Why it was that, while so many other people just gave up on, the youth, thought, okay, we'll never get them. The youth will come out and always vote Democrat, and we'll just get them when they're older, disillusioned by the Democrat, failures, smacked around by reality for a little bit, and then that's when we'll get them. But if you take a look at Charlie Kirk's thesis of going on to college campuses and engaging the students there and being so detailed, so knowledgeable about everything that he knew he was going to encounter and have the facts, data, and statistics to be able to push back just a little bit and get them thinking. Why was he so sure that that was the way to go? Why was he so sure that that would be so successful? And this statement right here in this speech, I think, is what we need to remember the most when we talk about the left. Take a look at their behavior and what we should do as we try to engage in these debates over culture, over politics, and various other issues. This right here, I think, encapsulates the operating thesis that most of us should take to heart as we move forward. And here it is.
On the cross, our Savior said, "Father, forgive them, for they not know what they do." That man, that young man, I forgive him.
Forgive them, for they know not what they do. Now, a lot of people heard those words and thought about it as a great testament to Jesus and the healing powers of Christianity in one's soul. Where other people are talking about how they're not sure if they would have the strength to say those words, especially on that stage in front of all those people when talking about the person that killed the love of their life. Could they actually take their faith and be beholden to it during the time of their greatest grief? And while, yes, that is quite the testament to the beliefs of the Kirk family, and while, yes, that is quite the statement to be making, very powerful, I just go off and I think about it as the deeper level, right? What we truly saw and witnessed. It wasn't just her forgiving the murderer of, the young kid that killed her husband. It wasn't just a testament to Christianity and the power of Jesus Christ. I think that statement alone probably encapsulated what motivated Charlie Kirk and why he was the guy that he was. Because think about this. They know not what they do. Where did he go? What was the mission of Turning Point USA? Well, as we would see, he would go to college campuses, to schools, to the institutions that were dominated almost exclusively by the left. And we had all given up on the youth, right? And we remember being the youth, right? What was the saying that we would use to excuse us, just writing off, the young adults? It would be, well, if you're young and you don't vote Democrat, you don't have a heart. If you're old and you're still voting Democrat, you don't have a brain. We would just say that casually to justify not even competing for the youth vote. And some of us would think about how when we were young, fresh out of high school, how we were much more liberal or much more, favorable of the Democrat Party. And why is that? Because we take a look at the school. It is dominated exclusively by the left. They took control of the administration, and then they discriminated politically in their hiring practices. They filtered the candidates for those that would just promote and believed in left-wing ideology. So from the very first day of school, when you take a look at it, especially now, what happens? The kids walk into that classroom, they see rainbow flags and all other leftist paraphernalia, promoting the left-wing ideology. The books that they are read are all about leftist beliefs and ideology. The textbooks that they are given is filled with a bunch of false narratives in order to promote leftist ideology. The students, if they go along with the authoritative teachers, are rewarded and celebrated. And yet, if they express opinions that are more conservative, they are punished. And that happens from the very first day of school to when either they leave high school or they graduate college. We've seen the articles about, conservative students, writing a paper and the teacher said no because it expressed a conservative view. Either rewrite this for a viewpoint that I agree with, or you're going to get a failing grade. That punishment structure is there. And during that time, the school systems are going off and showing clips from CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, MSNBC, right? Going off and promoting them as authoritative sources while demonizing any conservative sources, Fox News, Newsmax Now, any right-wing publications. They are teaching them from the very beginning to engage in left-wing ideology and to be hateful of conservative ideology. Now, of course, this doesn't work on all students. They still have plenty that grow up conservative now, not as much, but those whose parents take deep interest in their children and guiding them and helping them to understand that their teachers are not always right and so forth, still end up conservative. And they get into the counter narrative, for watching CNN at school. Maybe they watch Fox News at night, and that helps them understand. Or maybe they came across Charlie Kirk, and that awakened their eyes. But when you understand the heavy indoctrination of the public schools, you understand just how much those words, "forgive them, they know not what they do," probably has a deeper meaning than just the healing of Erica Kirk and letting go of her grief and understanding the entire mission of Charlie Kirk. Because when he pushed back, he didn't just, get up in their face, say they're wrong, and spewed a bunch of things. A lot of times when he was pushing back, he was asking questions. And then you would start seeing the lights come on as they couldn't answer why they believed what they believed, or they would go down this rabbit hole of circular reasoning, and you would see their eyes opening up. They do not know what they do. And if we start taking a look at that just a little bit more, it can fundamentally change how we approach the left and be more like Charlie Kirk as we do so. Now, of course, it's not that none of them know what they do. There definitely is some of them, those in the leadership position. Now, are those people themselves evil? It's kind of a hard term. How do you define, evil? Whether it's intentional, that they know that what they're doing is wrong and evil, the consequences of what they're going to do, or are they just, playing to the crowd in order to maintain their status and maintain their power? Like, for instance, when Gavin Newsom, recently came out, and, the California legislature, all dominated by the Democrats, did this whole thing of trying to claim that their law now makes it so that ICE has to take off their masks. Well, we know what the end result would be if that was actually enforceable. Luckily, it's not. But if that was enforceable, what would that do? That would lead to doxing. That would lead to ICE agents having their families threatened, and of course that would be designed to get them to quit, so there would be less ICE agents and less deportations. Now, would you say that Gavin Newsom's actions and the actions of the Democrats in the legislature of California are evil, knowing that that would be the end result? Or are they playing to a crowd and to pass legislation that they know they can't enforce? And they think, well, we can't enforce it anyway, so why not just play to the crowd? But are they really taking that then what question? Right? So that's where it gets, hard to distinguish whether they're just careless as they play to the crowd, or if they're intentionally this bad. And I'm not someone who is going to be able to go off and really judge that, at least not at this time, right? I'm going to wait a little bit further, but we all know what the end results would be. Evil versus negligence. You take your pick. But if you understand that the vast majority that you see showing up at protests, some of them are just collecting a paycheck. You see them marching in the streets, chanting statements, and you think, wow, what vile statements. You think about their support for abortion, and you ask yourself, do they actually know what they are doing? And if you understand that they know not what they do, then you can change the way you approach them, and you might be able to convert and change more minds, right? Because let's face it, if someone comes up to you and go, you're a horrible, evil person, are you going to go off and listen to anything that they say after that? No, that puts you on the defensive. That's going to be you going, no, I'm not evil, you're evil, and the shouting match back and forth. But if you go through and go, okay, let's debate this and let's, on ideas, right? And set the stage where if you have to demonize your opponent, then it's just an admission that you don't know what you're talking about. It's just an admission that you have no substance. You're just regurgitating mindlessly. Set that as the stage, right? And then force them to debate without demonization. And you could probably convert and change a lot more minds that way than you can with saying, you horrible, evil communist. Now, of course, the whole calling them communists, look, if they come out there, like Bernie Sanders, AOC, whatever, and they go, hey, we're democratic socialists, and then we call them socialists, and they go, oh, you're demonizing us. No, that's not demonization. You called yourself socialist. We're just not arguing with you. All right, we're just going to take your word at it. But they know not what they do. And as I go through and take a look here at the second clip, right, I want you to keep that in mind, because otherwise this would infuriate you. But keep in mind, they know not what they do.
Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! No, you guys gotta get Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Charlie Kirk! Racist bastard! Racist bastard! Piss on your piss on your Charlie Kirk! 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 He was a racist! He was a racist!
They know not what they do. I can probably guarantee you that all those people going out there and saying Charlie Kirk was a racist, bigot, sexist, he was against women's rights, and all the other stuff that we heard, I can guarantee you that for almost all of them, they never heard anything he said. They never listened to him. In fact, there's probably a large portion of them that until the news broke that he was assassinated, that they hadn't even heard of Charlie Kirk, right? I mean, it would be nice to say that after everything that we saw and the candlelight vigils that went international, that everybody knew who Charlie Kirk was. But there were still people who didn't know who Charlie Kirk was, or kind of heard the name but didn't really know anything about him. And that's a lot of what we're seeing by these people spewing in the streets. And they're making their signs. And of course, we know that the left somehow miraculously has spontaneous protests where they all have the same professional signs made up. Yeah, real spontaneous. But they don't know anything about what they're talking about, because they never took any time to actually listen or hear what Charlie Kirk said. And we got this all the way down to, school boards, that we have some of the, school board members go, I never heard of Charlie Kirk before he was assassinated, but I did some research and he was a Nazi or a racist and all of that. Yeah. So what they're doing, what they know is nothing. They just went to a bunch of left-wing sites that are deeply ingrained in politics, the people that hated Charlie Kirk the most, and then read what they had to say. It was kind of like, the New York Times, and we'll get to this guy later on, promoting someone who actively advocates violence to write an article about, I was going to debate Charlie Kirk coming up, and this is what I was going to say. And then, of course, trying to debate his points with a guy who's dead and can't defend or talk back. Yeah, that's how the left, goes about debate. They can only win as long as there's no one around to be able to question them. And so do you think that as we have seen people go through and do some very, very horrible things, like destroying Charlie Kirk memorial sites that, sprung up across the country, going off and chanting in the streets these vile words, do they really know what they're doing? No, of course not. Like I said, they never paid attention to Charlie Kirk. They never watched him. They never saw anything about him. They only recently, heard about him or Maybe they have kind of heard about him, but never really watched or listened to any of his content. And all they see is these partial quotes, right? And these very selectively edited videos that take a answer to a question, because sometimes when we answer questions, we go through, here's what the premise of the question is. And I don't agree with your premise, and here's why. So you could take that, I don't agree with your premise because your premise is XYZ. Well, if they selectively edit those videos about what you are believing or articulating the premise of the question to be that you disagree with, they can make you seem like you're the one agreeing with it. That, yes, those words came out of your mouth, but it was words of why it is you disagree with something, but they can selectively edit it in order to make it seem like that was what you believed in, rather than trying to get the left to realize that the premise of their question is showing or more indicative that that is their belief. And this is how the school trains these kids, not to search for the truth, not to think critically, but to just blindly accept what they have been taught to believe in the schools without question, all left-wing ideology. And the part of that is the left in the schools telling the kids what sources of information to believe unquestionably and what sources to ignore completely and automatically discard as propaganda. And I know you could say, yeah, but even at that, the basic code of moral decency would suggest that you don't destroy memorial sites for someone who was assassinated. While you and I can agree on that, do they share the same morals? Do they know what they are doing is immoral? If they have been, from the very first day of school to college graduation, and everything that they follow tells them that that is decent, or at least that is justifiable, and that those actions are them fighting Nazis, do you think they understand just how bad and immoral they are? Remember, the concept of one person's villain is another person's hero. And so the left is taking a look at Charlie Kirk and they think of him as a villain. Now they don't know why. They don't understand anything, but they blindly believe that because they've been told he was a Nazi or that he was a racist, bigoted person. They know not what they do because they don't know anything. They don't research anything. They don't critically think about anything. All they do is spent their entire life being told, these are the sources you trust, and this is the narrative to believe in. And anybody who says anything that disagrees with this source is a horrible racist person. And we see that all across media that is designed to reinforce that view on them, to blindly believe that view. And as far as assassination attempts, that is nothing new. We should have woken up to what was going on long ago. For instance, let's take a look at this clip. It's been a while. It's been 8 years, 9 years now. But this should have been the wake-up call. Here it is.
And there you hear some of the gunfire. A gunman with a political axe to grind opening fire. His target, Republicans. 5 people were shot, including Louisiana Congressman Steve Scalise.
Did we all forget about that? When back in Trump's first term, early on in Trump's first term, when a left-wing nut with a gun went to the Republican congressional baseball practice game, practicing for their upcoming game, and just started opening fire. And of course, even back then, the Democrats were going off and making up their excuses about how it had to be right-wing rhetoric and downplaying their culpability with their rhetoric and their statements and so forth, right? We should have woken up back then to what was happening, to the escalations that were going on. I mean, the rhetoric that was coming from the left was bad back then. And yet it's only gotten worse. What do you think was going to happen when, just with everything that they're taught in the school, that the sources that they are being told to watch are constantly, all day, every day, trying to go through and say, anybody who sides with a Republican is a white supremacist, is a racist, is homophobic, wanting to commit genocide, an existential threat to democracy, wants to throw you back in chains, and, all of the rest of it. You know what they don't do on any of those shows? Talk anything of substance. And we can try and go back and take a look at how this all started, right? Some people want to start it with the internet and the, freely anybody could say anything and everything that they wanted to say, no matter how horrible. But I think it really kind of started with the 24-hour news network, where they were trying to find a way to fill in all this time without just repeating, what the last 5 shows of the day was talking about and, informing of. And so what did they do? In order to create filler time, they started going off and demonizing and engaging in demagoguery, right? Switching from news to just opinion. And them unable to defend the indefensible positions that they have is just demonization. And that just further radicalized as the generations that were coming out of school and already told to believe these people, were listening to them and then integrating those statements into the classroom, further radicalizing everybody, in that generation, and doing so year after year. And as they got more comfortable, they started pushing more and more hostile language here, right? And how they were going off and, punishing conservative students and so forth, right? Just very hostile, disgusting language. And we're starting to hear, more about what's going on in the classroom. But you see, as that has been exposed, what has the left been doing? Well, if you're in California or in some of the other far left states, you see that the state legislature is passing new laws. They are passing laws that advocate that it's okay for the schools to lie to the parents, for the schools to hide from the parents what they are teaching in those schools. Think about that. They are wanting to protect the schools so much from being exposed for what's going on that they are overtly passing legislation and policies saying it's okay, in fact, promoted to lie, deceive, and keep what's going on from the parents. Charlie Kirk knew this. They do not know what they do. And so is it any wonder, as we go through and we, just took a look at the clip, all from all those years ago about the first warning sign that we should have realized where the left was going, and they've only gotten worse. But as they go through and they are taught to believe everything of the leftist ideology and the Democrat Party, and anybody who disagrees with them on anything is racist and all of that, as they have done that to try and hide that they do not know what they're talking about, that their positions are so indefensible that all they can do is demonize you. After they get out of the schools, what is it that they're seeing from their elected leaders? Remember, you think about elected leaders, and you think these are the people society has lifted up to positions of power because they're supposed to be great people, because these are the people that we thought was the best among us. And what do they hear from them? What is the message that is going off time and time again, day in and day out, not just from the media, but from the government itself, after they've gone through the government-run public school system? What do they see from the public leadership that they have been taught their entire education to believe in, that is the moral and just side? This is what they see.
I want to tell you, Gorsuch, I want to tell you, Kavanaugh, you have released the whirlwind, and you will pay the price. You won't know what hit you if you go forward with these awful decisions.
Press always asks me, don't I wish I were debating him? No, I wish we were in high school. I could take him behind the gym. That's what I wish. They asked me, would I like to debate this gentleman? And I said, no. I said, if we were in high school, I'd take him behind the gym and beat the hell out of him.
If you had to be stuck in an elevator with either President Trump, Mike Pence, or Jeff Sessions, who would it be?
Does one of us have to come out alive?
You see anybody from that cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd. And you push back on them. And you tell them they're not welcome.
When they go low, we kick them.
You cannot be civil with a political party that wants to destroy what you stand for, what you care about.
You're in the arena, you got to be ready to take a punch. You got to be ready to throw a punch for the children.
I don't think, even in states where Donald Trump won big, that it does you any good running away from Donald Trump. I think you need to go back and punch him in the face.
How dare he say the things he does? Of course I want to punch him in the face.
Right.
Yes, I have thought an awful lot about blowing up the White House.
I like the hair better before.
Julius Caesar like you've never seen before. A man dressed to look like President Donald Trump gets stabbed to death on stage.
When was the last time an actor assassinated a president?
And ironically, it is the left that is going out there right now talking about how it's right-wing rhetoric that is promoting and encouraging political violence. And I know you've gone out there, and I'm sure other hosts have told you that there are whole statistics about how most political violence comes from the right. They only get there by refusing to classify left-wing political violence as political violence. We've even seen this, with Charlie Kirk and, a couple of shootings that have happened since then. Oh, we don't know the motive, right? So, they're able to self-dilute themselves about what's going on in the culture and the side that they are on, because they just say, well, we don't know that it was political violence. It was, personal. It was, they were just unable to think rationally because they thought the person they loved was being targeted and threatened and that they were defending them, and all these other excuses in order to avoid admitting that it was left-wing violence. And they've done this time and time and time again. And so when we go off and we point out about the violence that the left engages in, is it any wonder that they are shocked that this is not left-wing political violence, and they come up with a completely different excuse as to what it was by just refusing to acknowledge its political motivation? But this is what they are fed all day, every day on the left. And this is what the schools are teaching them to believe in. These Democrat politicians that they have elected and elevated up to the highest positions of power in our country, being aired day in and day out on left-wing news outlets and left-wing influencer outlets. These are the people being elevated by the very places in which the schools are telling them these are the credible sources. Anybody who tells you differently is horrible, is a racist, a liar, and blah, 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 blah. Right? We've already kind of gone through what the schools are teaching them and what is going on. And then is it any wonder, right, when you go through and you take a look at the left-wing, influencers, people that have an audience, whether that is, the top echelons with the biggest audience, or the people in the mid-range that have large enough audiences that they are able to make a full-time living off of just spewing hate online. And yet these people, as they spew hate, show a complete lack of self-awareness. In fact, I would go one step further and realize that, there are some people that are going off spewing complete toxic hate because, hey, it makes money. So are they truly evil because they're just doing it because there's an audience for it, and that means they get to, quit their day job and live working from home and traveling the country with large sums of money, spewing hate, not that they believe it, but because that's what people will pay for. So they dilute themselves into thinking, well, they're just entertainers. It's no different than, an actor taking up the part of a villain in a movie. It's not who they really are, but we still pay to go see the movie, right? But then again, maybe they do actually believe it. So is it any wonder that as they get fed nothing but hate and promotion of violence because they can't defend their position, that we get the violence, that we get people that end up going online and spewing crap like this?
Dude, the firefighter guy, Trump, the people that support him, I just want you to know, okay? If one of you were in the crowd and you're a conservative fan of mine and you end up, getting blown away or whatever the fuck, I'm making fun of you the next day on Twitter. I am. Conservatives have been disgusting for years, which is why I don't give a fuck about anybody that winds up at any of these rallies and gets shot or whatever the fuck.
You need conservatives to be afraid of getting killed when they go to events so that they look to their leadership to turn down the temperature.
You have no, it's actually kind of scary, how close I was to getting people together to go down to his house and kill his family. Or it would have just been him and his father. Because I didn't know anything.
Hurt poor people that they can afford housing in Berkeley. I don't know how that works.
My understanding is that the property owners who have properties there choose just not to rent it at all.
Yeah, kill them. Kill those motherfuckers and murder those motherfuckers in the street. Left-wingers, liberals, you need to be showing your opponent's guts on there, okay? You need to be gutting them. You need to be shanking these and letting their intestines just ride on stage. What the is this, man?
Now, with those two examples, I am not willing to go through and talk about them not knowing what they are doing, because they engage a lot in politics and review a lot of politics. And I assume that would mean that they have been exposed to the viewpoints and statements of the other side. Now, it is completely possible all they do is take clips from left-wing sources and just react to those clips ignorantly. Sure, that is possible. But I would say that for a large part, that they know what they are doing. They are playing to an audience, feeding into the hate and vitriol just for money. They should know better, but they're doing so for the money. But in order for them to make money off of that, right, they have to have an audience. And where is that audience coming from? It's coming from people that have been promoted hatred all their lives. People that have been promoted the concept that speech is violence and that anybody who disagrees with you is an existential threat to their lives. And therefore, any violence they engage in is justified as self-defense. That is the preaching. And for the most part, when you take a look at them in the public schools, they haven't heard the counter narrative. They haven't heard the opposing reasoning and rationale that would explain why that is wrong. Nobody is born with that level of hatred and evil in their heart. Nobody is born with the concept of profiting off of hate. That is something that is learned. And where is the learning taking place in American culture? Now, some people are homeschooling, sure. But the vast, overwhelming majority is in the public school system. And I've talked about this, a while ago, what's called ideological subversion. And, there was, in the 80s, a lot of conversation about the old Soviet Union, ideological subversion, the tactics that they were engaged in, how they were already doing it, and so forth. And, how we didn't listen and how it's just gotten worse and worse. And what else would you call it when people are being taught to hate their country, that their country is this horrible, place where it is racist, systemically racist, but yet they can't identify anything that is actually racist right now in any of our institutions, but they are trained and conditioned to go, well, the point is that it's not overt, it's covert. It's kind of like, a conspiracy hiding in the shadows. And that's their line of thinking. That is their logic, right? Which is illogical, right? It's the ideological subversion that's been going on. And of course, the left has to maintain their power of the schools because they're not reproducing between abortion and, yes, LGBT, which, I'm not going off and demonizing or talking about them, but the point is, the left that goes out and celebrates the idea of not reproducing and killing your offspring. They're not reproducing. So their only ability to maintain power is to try and subvert your raising of your kids and push them into left-wing ideology through punishments if they don't go along with the leftist ideology, and rewards for going along with leftist ideology, and doing that from the earliest stages of education all the way into adulthood, and keeping that ingrained throughout their entire life. That's the only way they can win, because they're not having children the way or in the amount that conservatives are. And that's what they have to do. And so when you go through and take a look at that, the audience is there for them to spew that hate and make money off of it. And what are they doing? They're reinforcing that hate. They're reinforcing the idea that violence is the solution. And so, again, it is just another person, another influencer, another system that has raised up the vile people to tell them that you don't have to debate ideas, because they can't debate. Because debating exposes the pure crap of their ideology. So they can't debate. So they have to avoid debate. And the best way to avoid debate is to just respond with violence when anybody questions and dares you to think about anything. And this is why so many of us gave up on, the conversations with the left. Why so many of us gave up on the idea of being able to go into the school systems and have these conversations, right? Because even if some of them don't respond violently, which so many of them are, think about Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and so forth, all of these groups, what do? They just use violence to shut people down. You have an event set up to talk about, your beliefs and to give speeches. What do? They show up, engage in violence in order to cancel that event or get that event canceled and shut down, because all of a sudden there's a riot and it's not safe. Everyone has to disperse. Or they go up and destroy the tables, or they go up and just brutally attack you for the bystanders to see, so that they too would be too afraid to stand up and talk. That is their that is their entire operation. Just violence, because they can't defend the indefensible. And for a large part, because they do so, the media excuses it. The media says, oh, that's what free speech looks like. Yeah, setting buildings on fire, attacking people in the street, active violence. They have promoted that as constitutionally protected activities so that they encourage more and more violence to shut you down so that you're too afraid to speak. But it's also, when we go through and we take a look at the heavy indoctrination, when we are able to engage with the few that don't automatically resort to violence, what has the results been? Well, outside of Charlie Kirk, so many of us get so frustrated because we don't have the patience and grace of Charlie Kirk. We look at it, and I guess the best way to explain it is, remember that movie Idiocracy, right? And he has gone through, surveyed the field, and realized plants aren't growing because they are, instead of watering it, they are spraying the fields with Bondo, right? And so he's trying to explain plants need water. And they're going off, but Bondo, it's what plants like. It's what plants crave. And he's like, but why? Because they have electrolytes. Well, what is electrolytes, and why do plants need it? And it's like, because plants like it. And it's like, but why does Bondo have electrolytes? And they're like, what is electrolytes? What do they do? It's what's in Bondo, right? It's the circular reasoning. They can't understand the question. They can't answer the question. So all they can do is just regurgitate the marketing, regurgitate the talking points. And that's what so many of us, and trying to have the conversations and debates online, right? We go through and we try to have these conversations, and all we get is mindless regurgitation of talking points or just baseless insults. But Charlie Kirk started a movement that got through that started penetrating into the students, as it turns out, maybe the most effective way, which is beyond the means of so many of us. If we don't have financial backing, we don't have these large, millions of dollar, organizations, that allow us to quit our day job and travel the country, is doing it in public for all to see, for people to witness someone not being able to answer why they believe what they believe, or they don't have any facts. They're, just exposing the indoctrination, the mindless, blindless, or blindly following what they are told to believe without question, and how quickly their beliefs, their logic, their line of thinking falls apart under those basic questions. So maybe as we go through and look at engaging the left, and we realize that this is going to be frustrating, that this is going to be very, very hard for us to be able to do. And I'm not going to be perfect at it myself. I mean, I already know that, in upcoming content, whatever it is, right? I don't have Charlie Kirk's patience. I don't have his temperament. I have no ability, no reason, no claim to any of his mantle. I am not anywhere near as talented, gifted, or graceful. And I have no ability to reach the levels that he was at. So I already know that, going forward, frustratedly, I might, be more generic in terms as I go through and I talk about the left and all that. But I want you to keep in mind that scripture, that passage by Erica Kirk that she read, stated by Jesus. Forgive them, for they know not what they do. But forgiving them doesn't mean excusing the behavior. It doesn't mean ignoring the behavior. It doesn't mean calling out the behavior for what it is. But it's to understand that by and large, maybe it's less about them being horrible, evil people, promoting a toxic ideology, and that it's more about they're just ignorant and they have no idea what they're talking about because they're just regurgitating mindlessly as they have been told to do throughout their entire education. All right. So that's it for this episode. I'd like to thank you for watching, and please subscribe, follow as I go through and get ready for additional content, both in short form and long form. See you next.